Hello and welcome to NARC Live on Wednesday the 19th of July 2023, coming to you live from Norfolk on the east coast of England with Tammy M0TC.
Hello.
And me, David G7RP. Lovely to see you. On tonight's show, we welcome John G4IRN, who's going to tell us how he built a remote HF station 5 miles from his home. We take a look at some of the exciting club activities we've had since our last NARC Live show. And we find out what on earth this is. Now, if you haven't had a chance to enter, we've had quite a few entries, but if you'd like to quickly do that on Facebook or BATC, you can put your entries in there and we'll read them out when we get to that part of the show. But we start with club news, and it's been a busy summer so far. Summer? Yeah, looking outside today, I'm not sure, but I think it's summer. And we've had several events since we last met, as I said, 3 actually. So we've put together some little compilation videos to let you experience them, especially if you weren't there. The first one was Radio by the Seaside on the 9th of July. So if you were there, or if you weren't there, take a look at what you missed. Arriba! It's my Michael. If you have just joined, you haven't just joined Strictly Come Radio. Do you know, I must tell you, when I saw the rushes from that earlier on, I didn't have my earpiece in, so I didn't hear any sound. I didn't know you put a rumba track on that.
Well, I just thought it'd make it a bit, beachy.
Well, yeah, we were dancing around the studio, weren't we?
We were.
Just catching my breath. Anyway, hope you enjoyed that. If you didn't make it there because you thought it was going to rain, which I heard a few of you may have thought, you see, we did have a little bit of rain, but not too much, and it was a lot of fun. We had about 30 people there, so really good to see you all. Thank you very much for supporting it. Now, I'm going to mention this now, and I'm going to mention it in the newsletter as well. If you would like another one, because a couple of people came to me and said, why do we only have one? You know, we live near the coast. So if you would like another one, then all you need to do is drop me an email. And if we've got enough people to sort of say, yeah, I'd like another one, we'll probably do it in September time, before the weather gets too cold, but after the big rushes of the summer school holidays. So if you'd like another Radio by the Seaside organised, let me know. Anyway, the day after that, we had another busy evening for the club because we had our Trophy Fox Hunt, the direction finding competition that we ran last time. And this was again on a Monday night, left from Thorpe St Andrew. And again, Tammy's made another video. I can't wait to hear the sound from this one. So
a bit more sedate, I think.
I hope so, because I'm just getting my breath. Have a look at this. This is what happened on our Trophy Fox Hunt on the 10th of July. So these are the teams that met at Thorpe St Andrew Recreation Ground before they set off. We had Team Bitten, Team Tornado, Team Meandering, the Searchers, Team Lost Direction, Team Wrong Direction, Team Destruction Crew, Team Lucas, and Team Summer Wine. There was 9 teams altogether.
And the frog.
And the frog, yeah. Freddy. Isn't it Freddy?
Freddy frog.
Freddy, yeah, Freddy Frog. This is setting up on the field there and just taking probably the first bearings from the first transmissions. Now, if you've never seen or heard about this before, we don't race against time. This is all about finding the fox who are hidden somewhere in Norfolk in the shortest direction. So it's definitely not a race. It's all about finding them the least distance. So it's a lot about tactics and skill and some luck too. Now next, these are the teams at the Fox in the order they came in. So first was Team Bitten. Do I hear boos? In 14.7 miles. This is Team Tornado, who did it in 14.8 miles, just 0.1 of a mile difference. This is Team Meandering with Jenny and Colin, 16.5 miles. This is called the Searchers team in 18.8 miles with Mike and Bob. Richard, Toby and Fred, Team Lost Direction in 19.2 miles. Team Wrong Direction with Ben, Nev. Oh, no, Rachel, did I miss one there? Maybe I did. Or maybe I'm not talking quick enough. Anyway, everybody else found it. A couple of teams didn't quite find it, and one actually had a technical problem with the car. But that was the Foxes, and that was the Trophy Fox Hunt 2023. So I hope you enjoyed seeing that as well. It really is a lot of fun. Now again, I'm going to have to say to you the same things I said the last time, because some people said, oh, you know, can we have another fun fox hunt? That was of course for the trophy, of which Bitten Group won that. But if you would like another fox hunt this summer, probably again in September will be the most sensible time, then please drop me a line and say I'd like another fox hunt arranged, and if there's a few teams together, we will arrange it. Now finally, the last thing that we've done since we met, major thing we did, was at Wheating Steam Festival this weekend, and we've got some pictures to show you now. So this is set up there, and thanks to Andy, Laura and Bob who manned it and set up against some quite challenging weather, it has to be said.
Yeah.
Some of the rain, it really was, wind and rain. That's what it looks like, 705 there, all-purpose rig. Some of the display boards that we put on. And this is a public display, and this is to tell people not just about our club, but more importantly about amateur radio in total as a hobby that people can join. So thank you for those of you who went and saw them.
There's a little bit of blue sky there.
There is. I think the Sunday was much better, Laura said, but Friday and Saturday were challenging, I think it's fair to say. So there's 3 events that we've done so far, and we've got another 3 major things happening this summer. So this is to tell you, or in fact we're going to put a slide up now just to give you some dates. So if you've got a diary handy and you'd like to make a note of these and some email addresses, I will be putting this on the newsletter as well. So on the 19th and 20th of August, this is the International Lighthouse and Lightship Weekend, and we will again be activating Haysborough Lighthouse all day on Saturday and Sunday, and it's open as well to the public on the Sunday. Now it's a really lovely place to work from, an interesting place to look at as well. And it's a great way of promoting our hobby too, because this is truly an open public event. So if you can help with that event, either setting up or running it over the weekend, can you get in touch with Malcolm? The details are on the screen there, g3pdh@btopenworld.com. Again, the details will be on the newsletter. Second up, on the 2nd and 3rd of September, we've got 2 contests. The first time I think I can remember the club putting in 2 contest stations on the same weekend. I hope we're going to be strong enough to do it really, but they're very different contests. So our VHF group, which really only started earlier this year under leadership of Phil G4LPP, there's a mixed mode VHF contest. They're looking or just about to confirm hopefully the special site to get the best coverage of not just the UK but Europe. Details of that soon, but if you can help either set up or help operate or help them in some other way, then there's Phil's details there, the drphil@gmail.com. And we'll be also running SSB Field Day, which is an HF only contest on the 2nd and 3rd of September, so voice only. We've done this before. It's going to be from Great Ellingham, which is near Attleborough. And again, if you can help set up or operate or help them run that event in any way, contact Andy M0NKR on m0nkr@hotmail.co.uk. Again, all these details will be in the newsletter. Tomorrow we have the funeral of Chris G4CCX. Brought you news of his death a little while ago, but it's just to remind you that his funeral is tomorrow. It's at Breckland Crematorium in Scolton at 11 a.m, followed by the wake at the Crown in Great Ellingham. Full details of this and where you can make donations as well in memory of Chris are on the Norfolk Amateur Radio Club website now. Now, you probably will now know about the Ofcom consultation. By many, this has been called the largest proposed change to our hobby in a generation, pretty much, and certainly for many, many years. If you haven't seen it yet, you really need to read it if you care at all about your hobby, because there's quite a few big changes muted. Now, that's just a copy there above us of what the page looks like on the website. On the Ofcom website, you can search, Google it, and we'll find it. But there's also a link from the RSGB website, rsgb.org/license review. Now, there's a page there with a brand new video that we helped the RSGB produce with Murray Nyman, G6JYB, and it's a fairly short video actually, but he helps to sort of interpret what some of the things are and some of the things that you need to really look at and consider. If I tell you this document is 103 pages, that may put you off, but don't be put off, because they really will be listening to the results of this consultation. They have to be publicly accountable, Ofcom. So these are not things that are definitely going to happen, but they're things that they would like to see happen in what they say, modernising and simplifying our hobby for the 21st century. So please have a look at that. Now, I can also tell you that very soon there'll be other guidance and other help and support available to you, and all the links for that, and you'll see it on a lot of the social media and things from the RSGB as well. They're going to help with extra things very, very soon. But again, if you make a bookmark of the rsgb.org/license review, you can watch this 10-minute or so video, and then there'll be other things very, very soon that we're helping them put together. I should also tell you that on the 2nd of August, we're having our own little forum to discuss it as well. So that's not very far away. That's two Wednesdays away, not next week, but the weekend after, about the Wednesday after, sorry. That's at CNS, and we'll be having a club forum then. We haven't done that for quite some time, probably nothing like that since our AGM earlier this year. Just to discuss it, what you think about it, what's good, what's bad. On the face of it, a lot of it does seem good, but there are some things to watch out for. So especially if you can look at that video and you watch some other things that are going to happen and support that's going to come from the RSGB, I think we'll all be better equipped for that forum on the 2nd of August. Finally, before we get to some lovely members news, RSGB district representative is needed for Norfolk. David Womack had to stand down fairly recently because of ill health. So the Norfolk district representative is needed to cover our county. Now, it's always important, and there's quite a few clubs, and amateur radio is quite strong in this region, so it's a very important role to have. But also to consider that in 2026, just 3 years away, the WRTC are coming here, and most of it is going to be around Norfolk. So the RSGB representative for this area will be even more important, if you like. Now, if you, and Tammy's just going to put a slide up now, if you are interested in this, you don't have to commit to it. You don't have to say, yes, I want to do that. You want to find out more about what the job entails, drop an email to this. This is David Delahay's email, M0MBD. This is his email address, rr12, that's the region 12, at rsgb.org.uk. rr12 at rsgb.org.uk. Now, I'm pleased to tell you that we have some members news now, and it's lovely. We love to see pictures and your news, but we also love to see videos. And this is something that James M0UKS and Lynn sent us a few weeks ago now. We've just been so busy that we haven't been able to fit it into the show. But we're going to show you tonight, and this shows some of their spring fledglings from their garden. Now, you probably, if you've been watching NARC Live for the last few years, you will have seen some of the camera systems that James and Lynn have put around their garden. They're quite extensive, and this is the sort of results that you can get. Actually, following James's recommendation, I can tell you as well that I bought my brother one of the cameras that he uses. It was about £30, and my brother now has a bird box camera fitted as well, so only about 30 quid will get you something to give you this sort of quality of picture. So it might be something to think about as a nice winter project ready for next spring.
So 1 hour later, it took him an extra hour to decide to
Yeah.
go. Oh, look at that. Lovely.
Fantastic. 3 great tits, 8 blue tits fledged this year. Lovely job. Thank you very much, James and Lynn, for putting that video together. Wonderful stuff. Now, Tammy, over to you for Little People.
Little people? Yeah, little people here. Have you ever wondered what the sky's made of?
Well,
Or maybe the planet?
cheese. Oh, is it really balls of wool?
It's balls of wool.
I never knew
Did you
that.
not know? And did you know what a shooting star is?
No.
A knitting needle.
Knitting. Oh, silly me. It's me thinking they're geophysical things. Anyway, that's wonderful. Thank you very much. This is from miniature-calendar.com. Tammy picks a picture from us every time we meet, but there's one of those pictures every day from this wonderful Japanese website. Thank you. That's really good. Thank you. So what have you been doing? Please keep in touch. We're not meeting now actually for 3 Wednesdays or 3 weeks, unusually, but we'd love to get your stories, your pictures, your news, all the things that you're doing in the summer, whether it's radio or something else. We always bring them. Just send them to this address, radio@dcpmicro.com. Send them to us for the very, very latest on the Wednesday of the programme at 3 o'clock, and we'll hope to show it that night. Thank you very much indeed for all of your news so far. So now it's round to that competition, the one that we set 2 weeks ago when we asked you, what on earth is this? Do you know what this is? Well, we had some. Now, if anybody, we better just check on Facebook and just
We
see
haven't
if
had
anybody
any.
has anybody guessed.
No, we haven't had
No?
any guesses online.
Okay, all right. Well, this is what people entered. Now, Kev M0KKM said this week's What on Earth is a PDRM82 portable dose rate meter. It dates back to the heady days of the Cold War and was to let you know how much post-apocalypse radiation you had absorbed, how brightly you would glow in the dark, or how long you had left. That's a bit dark, isn't it? Anyway.
Neil G4JUV for civil defence, a Plessy PDRM82 miniature Geiger tube counter shielded against beta particles on an EMP hardened PCB.
That last bit is really interesting, actually, if you're into these geekdom type things. EMP, electromagnetic pulse hardened PCB, so a special circuit board inside. Ian G4JQT says it's an old 1980s Plessy Geiger counter. Every home should have one. Yes, really, he says, rather darkly at the end.
Nev M0NFY, I think it's an oximeter. You know the thingy the docs put on your finger to see how red your blood is?
Yeah, I can see that, yeah. Okay, Bruce G4KZT says, I think this week's object is a radiation level measuring device.
Colin M0GMK, I think that this week's object is a personal dosimeter Geiger counter radiation detector as issued to the Royal Observer Corps during the Cold War.
And it is...
Da, 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 da.
It is indeed, as most of you said,
Plessy.
this is a Plessy Geiger counter. for the reasons you said as well. So a little bit dark that, but thanks to Paul G3VPT for sending it in. Hopefully we don't need anything like that now.
Hope so.
We won't get into that now anyway. Thank you very much indeed. By the way, we are looking for extra objects as well to carry on this competition. So if you're enjoying it, have a look in the kitchen drawer, I suggest, to find some unusual implements or some gadget or tool or something that you've got that you think others may not know what it is. We're always surprised by the ingenuity. I'm just trying to think, have we ever had one where nobody's guessed it, apart from the infamous one where I lost a tenner? Have we ever had? I don't think.
No, I think somebody's always
guessed
got
it.
it.
Always. So you see what I mean? So see if you can catch them out. Do send the objects to us, pictures of them, both in their unusual state, as it were, blocked off, as well as their answer, and we'd love to include them on the competition. Now, just time to tell you about...
Are we not going to look at next week?
Oh, next week's, of course, yeah. Script. Read the script, Dave. Right. Okay, let's have a look at this and see if you know what on earth this is. This is for the electronic engineers amongst you. Yes, I know it's a circuit board and, well, I better not say any more. But what do you think that is, or what do you think it's used for? I've got some clues, but I better not say any. I get a smack if I do, don't I?
I know the answer.
Well, yeah, you know the answer, but okay. Let's just say I hope you're not getting tired of this competition. Is that fair? I've got that look, ladies and gentlemen. Anyway, so let us know what you think that is. You've got just under 3 weeks to let us know. We need to know by the very latest at 3 o'clock, 3 weeks today. radio@dcpmicro.com, and we'll put this onto our Facebook page and onto the newsletter as well. So now, just a quick look at what's happening this weekend. Now, Saturday, it's time for a slightly later than usual Koblenz Sked, as usual on 7.123 megahertz at 10 a.m. local, with a talking on 145 250 megs as well. And everybody's welcome to that. On Sunday, the GB2RS News on GB3MB at 7 o'clock. And on Monday at 7:30 also on GB3MB, it's the Monday Night Net. And at 8 o'clock, the 80 metre CW net on 3.543 megahertz. Then next Wednesday, the 26th of July, we're meeting at CNS School for a social and also the Raspberry Pi Jam, another in those series. Jeff has set us some homework, so if you haven't got it yet...
I've done my homework,
nor have I. You've got 6.5 days to do it, so don't forget, no excuses. You've got to do, isn't it a times table? You've got to write a program in Python to generate a times table. Anyway, so don't forget it. And absences won't be an excuse.
Can I say that the dog ate my homework?
Because we haven't got a dog. And on Wednesday, August the 2nd, we also meet at CNS, as I said, for that members' discussion on the Ofcom consultation. And then we meet again here in 3 weeks' time with our guest will be Rob Sherwood, live from the States, to talk about his latest tests. You've probably heard of some of the Sherwood ratings, and he'll be with us then. And meantime, please keep sending your stories to us, and also, of course, we've got this card which we're very happy to send anybody you feel will be cheered up by a card from the club. Just send us the details of their address. We'll add your name to ours and send them to this address, radio@dcpmicro.com. Now we're very pleased to welcome our special guest. I don't think we've had John, at least as a guest on NARC Live, before. John G4IRN has built a remote HF and 6 metre station on a site 5 miles from his home in Shropshire. And he's going to talk us through all the challenges faced and how he did it. So welcome to John.
Hello, Thank you very much, David. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you lovely. Thanks very much for joining us.
No, it's my pleasure to be here, really. And just by way of an intro, John Warburton G4IRN. I'm into HF DXing and contesting. That's my main thing. I'm fairly active. Mainly CW, occasionally on sideband, and of course it's difficult to avoid FT8 and the FT modes these days, so I do some of that as well. But really, this story goes back.
I was going to ask you what made you do it. Shall we put your slide on the screen now? Because this is probably what we'd like to see, I think, now.
Oh, right, yes.
Is that right? Okay, so that's all right. So this is what now you can see from us what
everyone So let me give a bit of context. 3 years ago, I lived in southwest London, And that was about the time of the pandemic, of course. And like a lot of people at the time, I had a conversation with my wife about, shall we go and live in the countryside? It was, it was a very built-up suburban area where I was living, or where we were living at the time. And as far as radio went, we had, a 60-foot by 30-foot garden. I had vertical antennas, and I was reasonably successful on the HF bands. But of course, in a suburban environment, it's very challenging. There's noise, noisy neighbours, and always the fear of causing them interference as well. And with the restriction on antennas, I never was going to do awfully well. Anyway, we decided to move in November 2020, and on the map there you can see we moved to the Shrewsbury area in Shropshire. Actually we looked in quite a broad area, and we had a tick list of things that we wanted. And of course, my wife's list was completely different to my list, which consisted of lots of space and hilltop location. But actually, when you think of the practicalities and indeed the availability of rural QTHs that have a great takeoff, they're very, very hard to come by. And in the end, actually, we bought a lovely house. With great neighbours on the edge of a village, and we've really settled well, but it's in a conservation area, and we haven't got a lot of land anyway. But with it being in a conservation area, I can't put any antennas up. So fairly quickly, I started thinking, right, I want to buy some land or rent some land nearby so that I can have my station. And I rang up local estate agents, and there's a lot of agricultural land and equestrian type land around here. There's plenty. In fact, I think I've heard Shropshire is the least populated county, or least densely populated county, actually. So yeah, there's a lot of space to go at, although some of it's rather hilly, which can be an advantage, of course, if you're at the top of a hill. But I rang around some estate agents, and a couple of them said, "Well, come to our auction house where they sell off land." But one of them in particular was quite interested about what I wanted to do, and he actually said, "Oh, well, you'll need power there, won't you? And oh, you'll need internet, or maybe 4G." And he was fairly tuned into what I was looking for, and he said, "Leave it with me, and I'll get back to you." Anyway, 20 minutes later, he rang me back and said, "I think I've got something for you. Do you want to go and have a look?" So I rocked up, and actually it was his sister's land. They're a landowning family, and I was presented with this land as David said. It's about 5 miles from my QTH in the Shropshire Hills. You can't really tell from that, but it's 750 feet ASL. If I do that, you can see that's the land. It's just over an acre. That's facing north, and in fact, the land drops off beyond those trees. And although it does rise to the south, and if you go to the south, you can sort of overlook the whole thing. But in HF terms, importantly, north and northwest, northeast are very important directions. Northwest being and east being to the United States and Caribbean, and northeast to Japan. So certainly in contesting terms, having a clear takeoff in those directions is a real boon. And of course, over the North Pole into the Pacific, straight ahead. So I thought, yeah, this is good. And I obviously liaised with the estate agent and his sister, and we came to an agreement whereby I rent the land on an annual basis. Now, one of the big advantages two big advantages of this land, you can see some sheds on the left, and there's power into one of those sheds. So that was one box ticked. And the other thing is there's great 4G coverage from at least 3 providers, EE, Vodafone, and O2. So it all looked good. And in fact, what I'm going to do is kind of jump ahead to where I am at the moment. in terms of what I've got at the station, and then hopefully as I talk through that will help put what I've done and how I've gone about it in context. That says June 2023. Actually, I took this photograph today. So you can see we've got blue sky in Shropshire. That's this afternoon. So on that sort of acre of land, I've got a couple of mobile towers there. The big one in the middle is the P80, which I haven't cranked up all the way. I've got no guys on there, so I've been fairly conservative with what I'm doing. But you can see I've got a hex beam on there and a 6LE 6 meter beam on a rotator. It's a very windy site, and so because I haven't got guys on the tower, and the reason I've not got guys is because the land is very rocky. It's something that I may explore later, but it's not easy to get purchase into the ground for the guys, so they're freestanding on the trailers, and because it's very, very windy, I've gone for a least wind resistant antenna solution here. So the P80 in the middle there has got a hex beam and 6LE on 6 meters. On the right, there's a 50-foot box section mobile telescopic tower with actually I've got a just a lightweight alley pole out at the top of that, 10 feet at the top of that. So that's at about 45 feet at the moment, but can go higher. And the other antennas, you can see them labeled there. So I've got the 40-meter vertical on the left, 30-meter two-band antenna slightly towards us, tower in the middle. In the distance, you've got the 168-meter vertical, and a couple of inverter V dipoles off the box section tower. So that's where I am today. What I'll do is talk through how I've built the station, the technology I've used, plus give one or two alternate approaches that perhaps I could have done, or if you're thinking of doing something remote yourself, give you ideas for what you might want to use. I'm very, very careful about how I use the term remote because some people think of where they are as being remote from the radio, and other people think of where the radio is as being remote from the operator. So I try to use the terms radio site or radio side and control side. So I'm always at the control side, whether that be in a hotel room or home or wherever, and the radio side is obviously this site, which is remote from me, far up the road. So that's where I am today. But going back a couple of years, well, after we moved in November 2020, it was probably, well, it was certainly 6 months or so after that, around 2 years ago, July 21, when I actually took up the lease on the land. And that building that I said has electricity in, this is it. And you can see it's rather derelict. It was an animal shed. It was a pig farm, actually, a long time ago. Lots of asbestos around. But you can see there's that electrical pole going in there. So that obviously was a godsend and key to the operation. But as you can see there, security was lacking somewhat. So one of the first things I did was to get a local builder in and put a front door on. So you can see there, that's physically secure now, and I've got other measures in place there as well, obviously to keep an eye on the place. Plus actually I've got to know some of the neighbours, although they're not very close, and they keep an eye on the access tracks and so on. So once I got physical security in place, I was able to start thinking, well, I wonder what this is actually like as a site. And first thing I did was just string a trapped dipole across the inside of the shed, and you can see it there. That's 2 or 3 parallel dipoles with a couple of the legs trapped with water bottles on to keep them dry. And I just fed that into an SDR receiver at first. You can see the shed leaks, and those are the dark patches down the walls and on the floor. And it does get rather wet in there. So I have patched up some of the holes, but essentially anything I put in there, I have to waterproof. I kind of learned the hard way because when I had this dipole in there just to see what it was like, and it worked very well, incidentally. I just had this setup. You can see it got soaked. This was fortunately the PC and the SDR receiver and the router are on that lower shelf of the table, but you can see the monitor got soaked. So I learned after that yeah, precautions are needed. So what I got there, and this was the first thing I did at the remote site, a 4G router. So you can see that on the bottom shelf. That actually accommodates 2 SIM cards. So I was able to compare 2 networks. I went for EE and Vodafone, which were the strongest 2 signals, and both masts are line of sight from the shed. So those indoor antennas were fine. A PC running is rather an old PC, an i3 processor, and that was an SDR receiver, SDR receiver, and the PC was simply running some SDR server software. So at home, I was able to connect to the server with the associated client software, SpectraView, I think that's what it's called, and I soon realised that not only was it a very quiet site, but I was hearing stuff that I never used to hear at the old suburban QTH in southwest London. You know, it was just a joy to listen, and I thought this place has got real possibilities. I was getting quite excited at this stage. Okay, so thinking about, you know, by this stage, I'm thinking, right, what do I do next, and how do I go about it? So I've already touched on, you know, you need power, you need connectivity, internet or 4G, but when you're looking at remote operation, you've got to control the radio. So you're thinking, you know, the on-off switch, you need to control the frequency, the band changes, the mode as well. Press to talk, audio in and out. If you're into CW, then you need to be able to key it. If you're into RTTY, you might want to do FSK, frequency shift keying, with a sort of keying action. You know, you want to turn the volume up and down, etc., etc. And also in terms of fulfilling license conditions, you know, you need to be able to kill the power. So those are the must-have things if you are doing remote control, whether, you know, you're doing it from home or you're doing it from a field like I am. As your setup starts to mature, then really you're looking at full IP connectivity so that you can talk to everything in your shack. You might want to be thinking about antenna switching, controlling amplifiers, rotors, switching fans on and off. And one of the things that I found in my shed at the remote site there is that it gets very hot. And one of the things that I had to look at was fans, switching fans on and off, you know, particularly when it got hot. So those are the main areas that need to be thought of. Networking. Now, however you're going to do networking, whether or remoting, whether you are doing it from home or a truly remote site like I am, you need to be able to access that site. And here on the right, we have the radio site, and you with your headphones on in the control site, whether that be home or a hotel room, whatever. Your radio site must have a public IP address. Most broadband subscriptions at home do have that, albeit they change once in a while, but they are publicly accessible from outside, and you would be able to access your home from outside. Because they occasionally change in most cases, you can subscribe to what's called a dynamic DNS service that is yours, and you can get it for free. It's just a single address. You have to usually resubscribe monthly to keep it going, but you can get them for free, and access your site with that. So for instance, g4irn.ddns.com might be my DDNS address. But at your remote site, your radio site, you will have a local area network, and wherever you are on the control site, you will have a local area network, and they may have similar IP addresses. They may be different, but they will never connect unless you bridge them in some way. But the important thing here is that a public IP address is needed at the radio site. Now then, 4G brings challenges, something called Carrier Grade Network Address Translation, CGNAT. Now, you can see the radio site here in the top right, and me at the control site over on the left with my headphones on. If I want to be able to call up my radio site via a 4G network, incidentally, I have fiber to the premises at home, and potentially a public IP address at home. That's no good. If I wanted to contact home from elsewhere, that's great, but not for dialing out. Dialing out via a 4G network or to a remote site that's on a 4G network, there is usually no public IP address. And that's because the network operator works in cells, and each of those cells has effectively local area network addresses, LAN addresses. So what appears to be a public IP address at my radio site using 4G is in fact simply a LAN address, a local area network address on the cell phone operator's network. The public IP address that is exposed by the operator is useless because I wouldn't know where to map it to. It could map to any one of a number of operating cells. So that's where I had to get a bit creative, and actually I had some help here. What happens is that I have my DDNS address at home, or it represents the public IP address that I have at home, which does vary, as I said, so hence the DDNS address. And my radio site calls me at home. And actually, this is a continuous connection. And what it enables me to do, if we want to get technical, what I've got is a LAN to LAN VPN. So the LAN at the remote site on the right there, with that subnet range 192.168.50.* calls my home LAN on that public IP address G4IRN at noip.com. I don't think that's actually it, by the way. That's just for the purposes of this this presentation. So it calls me at home and joins the two networks. It's a LAN to LAN setup. So from home on the left there in the green box, I can dial in the browser any address 192.168.10.* and connect to it, whether it's my printer or the NAS storage or the PC. Equally, I can type 192.168.50. And it connects to all those addresses as well. So the radio, the rotator, the amplifier, all fully accessible from the control site over 4G through using this this type of VPN. The restriction here, which you might have realized, is that only works dialing into my home site. So if I wanted to operate from a hotel, can't do it with this approach. And I'll come on to alternative ways a little later. Now, I mentioned about several networks available. And here, what I'm doing here, I'm pinging from home, actually, the router at the remote or the radio site. Yeah, so 192.168.50.1 is the gateway or router at the radio site. And this was actually before I had fiber to the premises in at home. This was an old VDSL connection, and we're about 2 miles from the cabinet. And these were the ping times I was getting. Now I'm getting more like 50 milliseconds, actually. In fact, less than that. But you can see here, and what I'm trying to highlight here is that we have these rather long pings, and this is the EE network. If you recall, my router was dual SIM, and I'm using the EE SIM here. But the odd one of the pings is a bit longer, and this is called jitter. Yeah, so the average ping time is if you like, the latency, it's the delay, and that is averaging what, I don't know, if you ignore those yellow highlighted ones, if we take a median, it's probably about 65, 70 milliseconds is the sort of average latency. But then we've got these outliers, the ones highlighted there above 100 milliseconds. And this is what's called jitter. And this is the variation in the ping time. And it's not particularly good. If you've got a consistent latency, you can cater for that. You can just you can buffer your audio streams, for instance, and have a buffer that will hold 100 milliseconds worth of audio, and it will be nice and smooth. But if you've got these occasional jitter effects, then you get audio dropout. Now this is EE. Look at Vodafone. Yeah, this is the other SIM card, and the signal strengths are just as strong on of the two networks at my remote site. But Vodafone, the quality of the service is nowhere near as good as the EE, which I found quite strange, really. You know, you think of both these providers as being quality providers. And I did I did report it to Vodafone that I was getting this extreme jitter, and of course I was speaking to a help desk in India, and she didn't really understand, and said, "Oh, we're due maintenance on the antennas on the cell this coming weekend, so have a look at what happens." And of course nothing happened. So I now use EE, and thankfully, touch wood, over the last couple of years, it's been reasonably consistent. And in fact, when I got fiber to the premises installed at home, everything's been a lot better. So that's something to watch out for if you're doing remote operation. And indeed, you know, if you're doing remote, you might have the 4G at your control side rather than the radio side. So, you know, particularly if you're on the road or operating from the car or a hotel. So this is something to think about. And I think it's not particularly network provider dependent. I think it's probably cell dependent. So, you know, it's a bit of an unknown entity when you're entering into this, and you have to try it, suck it and see. Okay, so just coming back to present, this is the current configuration I've got at a high level. So I've actually got a couple of radios in there. The K3 is the one that I tend to use on CW and SSB, and I'm using what's called remote rig units. There's one at the control side and one at the radio side. And these carry all the stuff I was talking about in terms of the frequency control, so the CAT data, PTT, audio in and out, and there's one at each side. I've also at home, well, I'm going to come on to this later, but also at home got the what's called the K3 Mini, which is a front panel to give a really realistic operating experience of the K3. The Aircraft KX3, I've just got that at the radio side, at the remote site. Both feed into, I can use either through an amplifier. What I've got is an antenna switch, two antenna switches, one in the field, top left, that switches between all those antennas that I showed previous, and then the other is in the shack, in the shed, where I select the output to go to that antenna. So I can select between the K3 and amp or the KX3 and amp. The other things I've got there, well, I've showed you the 4G router already in the SIM card. I've got a Raspberry Pi. On that Raspberry Pi, I'm running Node-RED. Now, there's been a couple of articles in Radcom over the last couple of months about Node-RED. I've been doing it for a while, and I'll show you my the way I use it a little later. But it's quite a good tool. It takes a little bit of learning, and there's some good videos available online, and that those two Radcom articles are very good primers to sort of give you a taste for it. So I'm using Node-RED on the Raspberry Pi. I also run a VPN called Zero Tier, which provides an alternative approach to the LAN-to-LAN VPN that I mentioned earlier between the two routers. I've also got a Red Pitaya. It's a type of, well, it's kind of a project board, if you like, really. a sort of Raspberry Pi or Arduino on steroids type thing, but it's very, very flexible, and you can load an SDR receiver onto it in software, and it will cover, I think, 7 or 8 bands at the same time. So when I'm not using my radios, I'd switch the red Pataya in, and that's running skimmer, CW skimmer on 6 or 7 bands, and FT8 skimmer on the same bands as well. And I can vary which bands. I tend to leave it on, I think 40 meters through 6 meters most of the time, when in fact it's in circuit now, and just leave it on the hex beam. If I'm using the kit, then I switch the red Pataya out of circuit. But what the running an RBN does is allow me to compare what I'm hearing with other stations, and often I'm hearing stuff in the Pacific that no other G station is hearing. You know, you can use PSK Reporter, for instance, to see what people are hearing, and there was the KH8 on 15 meters yesterday. I noticed my skimmer heard it. This is American Samoa in the Pacific, and no other Gs in the UK were hearing it at the time, looking at PSK Reporter. So it just highlights that the site is very good, pointing north. But that's the setup I've got. If I hone in on the Elecraft K3, the KX3 initially, what I do is I've got a PC at the remote site, the radio site, and on that PC I run some software. Now the software I use is it's called Win for K3 Suite, covers the K3 and the KX3, but basically it's what I call a soft panel. It's a software front panel for the radio, and I use remote desktop to connect into the Shack remote site PC, and simply control it through that remote desktop. I use Type VNC. There's loads of others. You've heard, no doubt, of TeamViewer, VNC, Chrome, Desktop, AnyDesk, that kind of thing. I did some comparisons, but because I'm on 4G, I'm not bandwidth limited, but amount of data challenged, let's say, because it costs money. If you take a subscription out for 4G, yes, I could get a unlimited package, but actually they're capped at 600 megabytes, I think it is. So I'm quite careful about the amount of data I use. Bandwidth isn't a problem, but I'm quite tight with the amount of data I transfer. And I found some of the other remote desktop programs were a bit data hungry. I found Type VNC to be pretty good, actually. It's fairly light, and I simply remote desktop into the PC at the site on which I'm running the software. I can control the PC as if it was at home, and I can run FT8 data modes on WSJTX or JTDX, and it works great. I can control the amplifier, and I'll come on to how I do that, and the antenna switches through the same method or from home. So that's the way I do the KX3. And on the PC at home, this is the view I get. I mean, it's as if, this is looking at the remote PC. It's as if I've got it on my own PC at home. And you can see the Win for KX3 suite, top right. And it's all cat connected to the radio. So if I switch on the band change on WSJT, I think that's JTDX, isn't it? If I switch on the band change on JTDX, or if I change the band change on the radio, it's all connected up and changes. You can see there, middle right, I've got the rotor control, and I can run that because that's IP connected. I can run that at home or on the remote desktop, doesn't matter. Same with the amplifier control. So I've got the Expert 1.3K, and their program there actually it also connects through an IP address. Actually, natively, that both those software want to connect to serial ports, so I have to convert the serial ports to IP addresses, and I'll come on to that later. What David didn't say, incidentally, was that I will take questions at the end of this. I'm conscious that people will probably want to ask questions. So save them up for the end, and we'll address those later. So that's the KX3. The other radio, the K3, well, that's it in the cupboard at the remote site. Incidentally, I have like a plastic shed there now, given my previous experience with the rain. Everything's in a plastic garden shed now. Didn't start out with that, but that's where it is now. And of course, because I don't use the equipment physically, it's much easier in the remote shack just to have the back panels facing outwards. So everything in the shack is arranged for convenience of cabling rather than convenience of operating. So that's what it looks like when you go to the shack. Occasionally, I wish I had a mirror when I'm at the shack and want to do something, and a mirror on that back wall. But what I have got, which I keep meaning to put on that back wall, is just a picture of the front panel, so that if I want to sort of bend around the corner and change one of the bands, I can remember where it is by looking at the picture. So you've got the K3 there. They were deaf on 6 meters, the original K3. So there's an Elecraft 6 meter preamp, that sort of golden brassy coloured box at the front. And what else? We've got the remote rig, the radio side remote rig unit on the left. You can see it's not very big, really, about the size of a paperback book. Big lumpy ferrite sitting on top of the remote rig, and to the left of that is a power supply. So yeah, that's the K3 in situ at the remote site, the radio side. And from home, as I mentioned, I use the remote rig units. One, although they're shown as two pairs there, there's one at the radio site, one at the control site. And they're great. And actually, if you're using, let's say, a legacy radio rather than SDR, although of course it's hybrid this, but for all intents and purposes, a legacy radio, the remote rig units are probably the best solution you can get for doing remote control, because they do the audio, they do the PTT, they do the radio cat data, they do the CW, they've got a built-in Winky unit. And using the K3 Mini, the sort of K3 front panel, gives a complete radio experience at home. So apart from the odd pop on the audio when I get a bit of jitter on the network, it's totally seamless and very lifelike using the K3 at home. Now, obviously, well, a couple of things. The remote rig units are harder to come by these days. They hit manufacturing problems. And of course, there's a lot of other radios around now where you wouldn't necessarily need remote rig units. So, for instance, I know some of you members have got 7610. There's an Ethernet socket on the back of a 7610. So it's IP ready, and using the software that ICOM provide, I've not used it, but you could effectively connect into your 7610 from anywhere in the world, given that you can, assuming you can access the radio site through a public IP address or DDNS address, as we talked about earlier. The Flex radios, very popular for remote. Of course, you can get the Maestro head for those, but also Flex SDR software. Again, pretty seamless. And where you've got IP addresses, it's made for remote. It's much easier. The FTDX 101, great radio, comes with, or rather, you can buy a external, I forget the name of it, LAN 10 unit or something, which gives you IP connectivity into the radio. And Yaesu provide their software as well for remote control. You know, it works well on a LAN, but you try putting it on a WAN, and you'll soon find out that pan adapter spectrum, all of it goes across the remote link, and you're talking 2 megabits of data per second, which is going back to my 4G statement about being careful about volume of data. It's a pity, really, because the FTDX 101, and I assume the 10 as well, it challenges the network data utilization because of the volumes of data. I don't know about the icon, whether you can throttle back the pan adapter data or not, but you certainly can on the Flex, and the Flex is a very good radio for remote. And there's, of course, there's other sort of remote control software around as well. If I didn't have the remote rig units, I could equally control the K3 with just that software that I showed you earlier that I use on the KX3, the Win for K3 suite. There's programs like HRD and others that you can use, Ham Radio Deluxe, that you can use for remote control. With this arrangement with remote rigs, I have my logging software at home. I did try having WSJT at home and bringing the audio over the remote link and decoding it at home. You can do that. But as a general principle, I try and keep the transfer of data to a minimum. So any data decoding, particularly from audio, I find it best to do at the radio side and then remote desktop into the WSJT or whatever your data mode program is. As I say, as a general principle, try and minimize the amount of data transfer too. You do, although the remote rig units, for instance, do use compression techniques, so you will lose some quality on any data transfer. And so that's another reason for doing data mode interpretation, decoding at the radio side and remote desktoping into it. Now, in terms of the license conditions, should talk about that for a moment. And actually, in the consultation document that David talked about earlier, there are at least one, possibly more, proposals for discussion in there. But as it stands, you can operate remote. You can, let's have a look. You need to have a supervisor. Does not permit the licensee to install radio equipment capable of unsupervised use by other amateurs. So it needs to be secure. Yeah, that's the point there. I shouldn't allow my station to be used by anyone who shouldn't be using it unsupervised. You can use communications links. If you're going to use a radio link at the moment, I believe you need a full license, which I'm okay for, obviously. I have looked at, incidentally, just to head off the question, I have looked at a point-to-point wireless link between me and the remote site. And interestingly, there's a hill in the way, but I've tried it on 2 meters and 70 sems. 2 meters, no, just with a walkie-talkie at the remote site and a friend listening on a radio at home. There's no connectivity on, no path on 2 meters whatsoever, but there is a path on 70 centimeters, which is interesting. So I suspect there's some refraction going on or something around the hill. But as it stands, only a full licensee can use a radio link, is my understanding. However, I notice in the Ofcom consultation document that they're proposing that any category of license can do that. It was my understanding, but always check the license and make sure you understand it. Another key thing in there, make sure that you're going to have no unintended transmissions. And really, my interpretation of that is that I should be able to kill the power from the transmitter in an emergency should something happen. And that brings me on to the unit I use for power control. So there's lots of available Wi-Fi controlled main switches that you can get off Amazon and such like. Whether they're, I mean, a lot of them claim to be rated at 13 amps, but whether you'd really want 13 amps continuous mains current through these small wall-mounted things, I don't know. This thing is a conservative 8 amps, I think. This is they're a bit hard to come by now, but there are other similar units. But the beauty of this switch is that it's got it's Ethernet web controllable, so it's got an IP address. It's got 2 outputs, And one of the key things that you need to remember is if you're going to kill the power to the radio to stop your transmission, what you don't want to be doing is killing the network router. So don't have the network router on the same kill switch as the radio is a recommendation. And I've got a list of recommendations later that we'll finish with at the end. But certainly I've got this segregation of power between radio and networking, so that if I do need to kill the power, it doesn't kill the radio, the network side. And that actually this switch is quite smart in that you can set it to restart either channel or both after a mains failure. So obviously with the site being in the countryside, remote and exposed, power does occasionally go off in winter when we've got inclement weather. This unit will restart both channels of output when there's a mains failure, when the power comes back. So that's one thing. The other thing is, using a router at home, occasionally it all grinds to a halt and, you reboot the router. Not so easy if the router's 5 miles away. What this unit has is a ping facility whereby, and you can do it on either output. I've done it on the network side. It will reboot the output switch if it doesn't have connection to a specified internet web address for 15 minutes. So I've simply put in there the BBC website and said, look, the rule is if you don't get a response from the BBC website for 15 minutes, either nuclear war has broken out, or there's something up. The router might need rebooting, and actually, what's happened more often is that there's been an EE service failure, usually following bad weather, and that's usually been the two major network problems I've had. That's been the cause, but this will reboot the router on that automatic ping thing. Now, obviously, as you're sort of wiring stuff around, you've got different facets of wiring. You've got the power, the electricity, you've got the radio, audio, etc. What I learned fairly early on, and the detail here is irrelevant really, but what I learned fairly early on is that it's important to document everything. You can see here, actually, I've got the two switches from that IP control main switch, one on the radio side to kill everything, and the other on the network side. And then I've got a further extension which I just leave stuff on all the time, which is fairly inconsequential in terms of being able to kill the power or not. The important thing here is really that it's worth documenting everything, because I guarantee you when you're 5 miles away and you've done changes and you haven't documented it, and you're doing a contest and it's 3 o'clock in the morning and something goes wrong and you want to fault find, your brain goes fuzzy and you can't remember what it was you did or where it is. So a lesson I learned fairly early on is just document everything, so that particularly if you're fault finding, you know where stuff is. Now, back to the sort of networking stuff. Another question which will likely come up is, what's the delay? What's the latency? Now, we saw the ping times earlier on, and I did say actually that when I had the wired internet at home, it was around 70 milliseconds ping time from home control side to the radio side. Ping is a return trip, so the one-way trip for a 70 millisecond ping is about 35. I actually did some, and this is fairly recent now, since I've got the fiber to the premises at home. I did, I measured the delays, or the delay between a local K3, so the green box is my home, the control side. I put an antenna outside, a 40 meter, a quarter wave vertical, on a fiberglass pole, and I tuned the Elecraft K3 at the remote site, the radio site, to tune both radios to the same signal. And so I was able to measure the audio delay between both radios by using some software called Audacity, which is free software. used in recording, home recording studios and such like. It's very good. But what it allows you to do is feed one channel in the left ear and one channel in the right ear. And what you're seeing there is the same signal, the top one, the audio received on the Elecraft K3 at home, and the bottom one on the Elecraft K3 via the remote link through the remote rig units. Well, a couple of things you can see there. One is the delay, and that's about 52 milliseconds. So that's the delay receiving from the remote site through 4G and internet. The other thing is I mentioned about quality of audio, and you can see on that Morse code signal, I'm just wondering what it's sending. It looks like 6GT maybe. On that Morse code signal, you can see the quality on the remote signal is compromised. And that's why I would say always decode data modes in particular at the radio side, and view it through remote desktop, or by some other means bring the decoded text across. But 52 milliseconds, and in practice it's hardly noticeable. The longer, or when you start getting more latency, you will start missing parts of call signs, which may be just about okay on SSB. FT modes, kind of okay because you've got a gap of a couple of seconds between transmissions, between overs. SSB, certainly if you're doing a high rate contest or working at the expedition, you might miss the beginning, first syllable. Morse code is a killer. You know, you're missing a character, and if the latency is too long, and the sort of latency that is just about acceptable, I think, is probably about 100 milliseconds. So I'm well within that kind of ballpark figure. I did touch on the amount of data coming across. So actually, just listening to audio and controlling the K3 in that top row of the table there consumes about 300 to 400 kilobits per second. There's a dual receiver on that K3, that doubles it. But in practice, what I'm finding, if I do about 8 hours of operating, it will be about I use about a gigabyte a day, actually. I tend to think it's about a gigabyte per day. So I budget for 30 gigs a month. And I've got a rollover on my contract anyway, so that does roll over if I don't use the whole lot. The Flex, I mentioned that you can limit or throttle back the data, particularly the pan adapter data is the chunky bit. You can throttle that back to have the refresh rate at minimum and still have a usable pan adapter on the Flex. And that's a very similar data rate, about 350 kilobits per second. If you turn the pan adapter up full, you're talking 2 megabits per second, which, funnily enough, is the same as the FTDX 101, and I assume the 10 is the same, because on that you can't throttle back the data. So I measured that at 2 megabits per second download and couldn't do anything about it, and was scared off using that. But actually, the K3 with the mini front panel is a lot more usable anyway than most software solutions. The Flex SDR, smart SDR software is very good actually in terms of soft panel operation. And the problem with a lot of these remote solutions is that CW is a challenge, and certainly the Yaesu remote solution and I think the ICOM, there's no good solution for Morse where you want to use, if you want to use a paddle at home or at your control side, should say, and have that come out okay at the radio, then remote rig is the best way of doing that. There are some other solutions around, but I haven't tried them, but they're generally based on WinKey, the WinKey units, which is what's incorporated into the WinKey unit. I did try a flex for a while, and actually, this is the one of the waterproof containers that I used before. I'm using before the plastic shed that I've now got, and the Flex 6500 bottom left there. Um, as I said, that was okay if you wind back the pen adapter data. I did have a bit of a problem with that as well on the with the amplifier, because I've got one of the original Expert amplifiers needing a very low drive, about 2 or 3 watts. There was a little power spike on the that Flex radio, the 6500. I don't know if they've cured it on later models, but certainly the amplifier didn't like it, so I'm not using that anymore. But you can see there that was a right rat's nest, and in fact I had 2 of these containers there. This one was 190. It is 190 liters. The other one I had was 175, and they're available from a company called Solent Plastics, and they're or targeted at truckers for mounting on the back of the cab. And actually, since I came across these, I've seen loads of them of similar type anyway, where they get mounted on the back of the truck behind the cab, and it's somewhere secure because they're lockable for the driver to keep their sandwiches and clothes and stuff, I suppose, or whatever they keep. But ideal as a waterproof container for a remote station, and probably not dissimilar to the radio in a box stuff that some of the recent or the recent Pacific D Expedition used. Some of you may have worked, but I found the kit got very hot, and unlike the guys in the Pacific who are using water cooling on their amplifiers, I mounted fans, PC type fans, on the box. I only had one. I think that I did put 3 on this eventually, but still it got very hot, and that was one of the reasons I moved onto the bigger plastic shed, as well as to accommodate more space. Jumping around a bit here, so I hope that's okay. But I added the hex beam in April 22, so that's just over a year ago now. And had some help. I've had a lot of help from friends, actually, from the local Salop Radio Society. So that went up in April 22, and that was the same time that the amplifier and rotor went in as well. So this was the sort of the journey to where I am at the moment. You can see there's a nice choke balun on the coax going into the box there, and quite useful to use chokes and so on where I can, and you can see more of the fans there on the box. The fans were controlled by a relay board, which I mounted on a Raspberry Pi, and you can see that mounted in the little takeaway plastic box behind the rotor control box. The rotor itself, Yaesu rotor control blocks, that has a serial port on the back. And I've used one of those ERC, Easy Rotor Control boards from Germany. Or rather, it doesn't, I should say, it doesn't have a serial port on the back, but it has a socket which goes into one of the ERC boards that you buy from Germany that gives it serial port connectivity. So both the amplifier and the rotor have got serial ports on the back. Of course, I want to connect to IP addresses, and that's where this serial to Earth Ethernet server comes in at the top right. So at the radio site, I have this 2-port serial to Ethernet server. The rotor, bottom left, with its ERC interface board, and gives me a serial port, and the Expert amp has a serial port. Both of those plug into the serial to Ethernet server, and what that does at the control site, so my PC at home, is allow me to run their software, where I simply connect to the IP address, which of that server box, it's it's about the size of a large packet of fags, I suppose, or slightly larger than a packet of fags. That box has an IP address. You can see it there, 192.168.50.150. So that's the LAN subnet at the radio site, the remote site. One of those serial ports is on or connectors is on port 23 and the other on 26. And I simply map a couple of virtual serial ports, 1 and 2 in this case, to those ports at that IP address, and that allows me on my home PC to run the amplifier control and the rotor control software as if I was at the remote site. So it's connecting to the virtual serial ports, which are mapped to the IP addresses of the server, or rather the IP address plus port numbers, which converts it back to physical serial ports on the devices. And that works really, really well. And looking in the box, you can see to the left of the rotor controller on the left, you've got the ERC board, which gives me the serial port, and then that plugs to the server on the right, which gives me IP connectivity, and we reverse all that into virtual serial ports at the control end where I am on my PC. Now, as I built the station, I put the antennas up and had individual coax runs to the shed where all the kit is. So I don't know, there was about 6 antennas, wasn't there, and 6 coax runs plus rotor cable and so on. And at that point, I didn't have the antenna switch in the field, and incidentally on the verticals, I'd laid radials in the sort of half hope that they would bury themselves. But what happened was the grass grew, and you can see here, local farmer came in and kindly cut it for me. Actually, he uses the hay for his cows. But what it meant was that I had to pull up all the coax cables, and also the radials that I'd sort of half hoped would bury themselves hadn't. They'd all risen up with the grass, and so were kind of a couple of feet in the air in some cases. So I had to rip everything out, and really that was the prompt to put the coax switch into the field. And so there's the 6-way antenna switch. Now at first I did use Raspberry Pi relay boards, and I had four relays on a single board that plug onto the Raspberry Pi, and you can run a little web interface that switches those on and off, and that worked really well. But I subsequently gone on to these K-Amtronic web relay boards. I mean, for this antenna switch here, I need it's 6-way, so and the control cable is 7-way, so 6 plus earth, 6 control lines plus earth. So really, you need a six relays at least. And these relay boxes, which are web controllable, they've got an Ethernet port on the back. So you plug it in, it gives you it's on an IP address, and you can control it. I've got a couple of these, and in fact, I've got a couple more coming, because you end up wanting to control so much stuff. And I outgrew the Raspberry Pi one, but the Raspberry Pi approach was a good value for money way of getting into it and working out the art of the possible. I've actually recently been given that's the Rat Pack unit. I've been given a 6-pack, which is for 2 radios and 6 antennas. So I'm going to have to double up on the number of relays for that, which is why I've got a couple more of these boxes on the way. But these things sit in the shack with the radio feeding. That's the on the left, I think, is the antenna switch cable, the 7-way cable going into the relay box, and you can see 12 volts on those brown jumpers between each of the connections, and you can see it's connected to the Ethernet at the top with that yellow Ethernet plug, and I've put a label on there with the MAC address and the Ethernet address. You see the one on the right is suffix 22 on its IP address, and on the right there you've got the internal antenna switch, the one I switch between using the Red Pataya, the K3 or the KX3, sorry, any of those outputs from the shack to the antennas. So those relay boards control everything. And what I'm doing is using Node-RED, which is the software tool that it's kind of a it's not a programming language. It's a kind of toolbox of stuff that you can drag and drop to build workflows. And using Node-RED, and as I said, it's in Radcom last couple of months, I've got these controls. Now, on the right, you've got the antennas, and that's where I'm switching between all the antennas. It's wired so that I can only switch, or rather, it's programmed so that I can only switch one at a time. So if I select the 8-meter vertical, it will deselect the hex beam in this case. Same on the source ones as well. So that middle bank is the antenna switch in the shack where I select the source to go out to the antennas. What I must get round to is do more. I need to do more automation and switch those antennas based on the band selection on the radio, and that's a kind of next step really. And you know, I've been doing this obviously for over 2 years now, and it's really evolved over time. There's no way that I could have set all this up from day one. I'm just doing small improvements as I go along. And one of the things I've found is that if you change too much all in one go, then you'll be back at the site in no time trying to fix something. So it's best to evolve small changes, small steps at a time, and fully test everything before you leave the site. Though it's not always possible because obviously some of the connectivity is different. But this is what I'm using Node-RED for, and it's very usable. And again, it connects to the website. 211 is the suffix 211 is the Raspberry Pi at my remote site. So I'm using the LAN to LAN VPN here, but actually using zero tier, I can the other VPN I'm using, I can use this from anywhere in the world, provided the laptop I'm using has zero tier installed, and I connect through to my remote site. And also using Node-RED, I can monitor the status of the Raspberry Pi, and you can see here at the 43.8 actually is quite normal for a Pi, and I can change that. That should be green really. I can need to change the threshold on that, but it does get very hot at times. And in fact, I haven't got a shot here, but I do have an environment monitor that Net's tab on the browser. The UBBot control panel is an environment monitor, so I can look at temperature in the plastic shed where all the kit is, plus in the shed, the internal shed, and I can look at humidity and stuff. And it does get hot in there in summer, so I have to watch that. And in fact, I may have to put a fan of some sort in the plastic shed that I've got. It's just a garden shed. But that's another function of Node-RED that you're seeing here. And then at home, this is the setup at home. Nice and tidy desk there, I like to think. So what you've got there is the K3 Mini in the center, which is the radio-like experience that I have in the shack. To the left of that, well, there's an audio mixer that I use to either record. I can record what I'm listening to and use the headset at the same time. The remote rig unit, just to the left of center, is the black box. And then really the two screens on the right are what I use for the remote radio stuff. I've got my logbook on the right, which is DX for Win, or I use DX log or N1MM for contesting. The remote rig box has 2 serial ports, so I can expose the the frequency of data from the radio to not only the front panel, the K3 Mini, but to the logging software as well. So the logging software, I can control the radio. Then on the center screen, I've got my amplifier remote control program, the rotor remote control program, and top left on the middle screen is the switches for the antennas. That's before I used Node Red. That was the old panel, and then the actual shack itself, if you like, well, that's it in its entirety. As I say, it's in a garden shed, and a lot more room in there now than those two plastic trucker boxes that I previously had. But yeah, a lot of wires, and as I said, I don't need to look at front panels, so I've tried to make everything accessible from a wiring point of view rather than a usability point of view. You've got the 4G router on the top shelf there. There's a little PC on that top shelf in the middle as well, which I use for the run the software to which I remote desktop to. The mains switch is below. There's a network switch at the very top right and a main switch below that, together with the environment monitor. Then on the second shelf down, you've got the Elecraft KX3. And to the left of that, in a plastic box, is the old relay unit I had, the rotor controller. Yeah, coming down, K3 power supply. Coming down again is the Expert amp. So that's essentially what the shack looks like. There's periods when I don't have to go up there at all. I was up there today because I wanted to get the dipoles a bit higher ahead of the IOTA contest coming up. So I've done some work up there. There's always things going wrong, unintentionally. I'll go over there for a small job, like, raise the tower, and something will snag. It happened the other week. The rotor cable snagged as I was raising the tower and pulled out of the rotor. So there was another job. I had to get another rotor plug and re-terminate and put it in. I've just recently refurbished the smaller box section tower, so I had that apart and put new cables on it and so on. The what was it today? The electric winch on the box section tower. The hand controller wasn't working on that, and I had to take it apart. A wire had come loose. It'd been under strain. I hadn't realised. So there's always stuff that needs fixing, and it's quite time consuming, and it has been over the last 2 years while I've been building it. However, it is a great station to operate in a good location. Not as good as some of the big contest stations in this country, and in fact, although it's a good station, there are challenges operating it. I can't easily have a pan adapter, for instance, and I am bandwidth challenged to a certain extent. So, and I'm at the mercy of the telco providing 4G and so on. So, it's not all positive stories. It swings and roundabouts, but on the whole, it is obviously a great thing to have. Remote, and I'm concluding now with this slide. Remote operating tips. As I said, just write down everything you do, especially if it's your home station that you're controlling when you're away from home, you're going to come back to it anyway. But if you want to avoid trips to a remote site in the sticks like I've got, just write down everything you do, down to IP addresses, MAC addresses, connections. You'll need it when you least expect it. Minimize data transfer. All of these points I've touched on previously. I'm just trying to sort of bring them together. Minimize data, do decodes at the station, and that avoids not only data transfer, but it is cleaner as well. Your audio is cleaner straight out of the back of the radio. Choose the radio carefully, and especially if you're using 4G, you need to think about whether, for instance, pan adapter data is coming across. CW can be very tricky. The remote rig units have it natively, but the K1EL WinKey units are the way to do it. And there are programs available to have one of those at either side. In fact, one on the K1EL website, plus other solutions based on Arduino as well that I've come across. But I'm yet to try those. I want to try them. I want to see if I can remove the dependency on on the remote rigs. Yeah, I didn't mention this one earlier, but if there is a PC at the remote site, similar to the mains unit, you want it to wake up after a power loss. So either wake on LAN, or what I do is have wake up on power on. So I do occasionally just switch all the power off remotely on the radio and PC, just to sort of reset everything and reboot the router as well. And when I bring the power up, then I can connect into the PC because it wakes up on power up, and that's in the BIOS settings. Again, don't kill the network hardware when you kill the radio power, because that involves a trip. And as I said, it's good if you've got hardware. I mean, you might be able to do this on a Raspberry Pi if your main switch doesn't do it, but check that you've got internet connectivity, and if not, reboot the router. Saves you a trip. Jitter, I talked about that, and not all providers and networks are the same. Desktop software, the remote desktop, again, not all the same. I use TightVNC because it's fairly frugal on data. And again, you soon learn the hard way that if you're making big changes, then it will involve more return trips to the station. So small steps, one at a time. It's easy when you've got a new site, an acre site, and you've got all these ideas. You're like a kid with a toy box, and you just want to do everything at once. But actually, it's best to be quite pragmatic and go easy, make sure it works, and progress. Something else I do, particularly because I'm doing FT8 and JTDX, WSJT at the remote site on the PC there. Obviously, I want to get my log data back home. So what I do is just have some cloud storage that both PCs have access to, and then it's easy to transfer data. Or occasionally there's programs that software that I want to transfer to the remote site. I just do it through that cloud storage. Or if you have a NAS drive, you could, as long as it's on the subnet of one of the two sites, with a LAN to LAN VPN, you can connect that. And another big thing, and particularly in my kind of scenario where my radio site is remote, it's in the hills. It's a long way, probably half a mile from the nearest road. You need a four-wheel drive vehicle to get there. There's no help if something was to happen. So I always put my WhatsApp, my location, my live location on my WhatsApp to my wife. Obviously let her know if I'm going, because if she's out, I'll let her know I'm going up there. And I always give her a ring when I'm leaving, because if I was to have an accident up there, no one would find me. I'm pretty sure of that. No one would find me. Just think of the risks, and particularly, towers. If I'm doing tower work, I try and go up there with a pal, and make sure I'm not on my own, just from a safety perspective. So that's very, very important. Okay, and I think that winds it up, really. It's a bit of a whistle-stop tour. That was my site before I put the 6LE up on 6 meters, but that was a misty January morning, I think. But I thought it made quite a pretty picture. It's been it's been quite a project, really. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. I've learned a lot, particularly about networking, especially so. And in many senses, just building the station has been as much fun as operating it. But of course, operating it is fun as well. And you can see the fruits of my labor if you look on RBN or PSK reporter.info. You can see what I'm decoding when the skimmer's on. So, yeah. Well, I hope you've enjoyed what I've had to say. David, I don't know if you want to put it out to questions.
Absolutely, John. Yeah. I mean, I think the first thing I'd like to say to you is, and I've got some questions and thoughts, as I'm sure many others have. So if you have got a question or a comment or anything for John, please do enter them now to BATC or Facebook. One of the first things I think I'd like to say is congratulations for moving in November 2020, because they were strange times. I don't want to dwell on it much, but that is in itself quite a decision to make that year, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, we'd had a few things happen in the family, and it seemed like a good time to move. I was thinking of working less. I was working remotely a lot anyway as an IT freelancer. So, and in fact, the contract I had at the time when we moved was with the body shop in Littlehampton. So it was miles away from where I'd lived anyway, and I'd never been there. Didn't need to. Much of the work I was doing was with overseas, um, members of staff in the body shop. Um, so I was used to remote working anyway, and we knew that we wanted to move. House prices were going up. We living in Surrey with a school behind us that was listed in the Sunday Times top list of schools. We knew that it was probably a good time to move. Um, and in fact, what happened was we moved into a rental property first, and we liked it so much, and we got on with the neighbours so well that we ended up buying it. So we didn't have to move again after moving into the rental property. But as I say, it perhaps wouldn't be the first choice of property radio wise, but it ticked a hell of a lot of the other boxes. And the compromise that I've made radio wise there actually has been overcome or mitigated by the fact that I've got the remote site now. So, everything, it all ended happily, let's say.
Yeah, well done. And it really does look quite a credit. And I'm sure it's helped a lot of people here, because it strikes me that a lot of the information you've given and advice about remotely connecting could equally apply even if people don't want to mount their station remotely from where they live. It could the advice and developments that you've made can apply. Obviously, if you spend a lot of time away, maybe holidaying, camping, and that sort of thing, then I presume a lot of that advice about remotely controlling your station still applies, really.
Absolutely, and actually, I was sort of conscious as we were going through this. There was a couple of things that I didn't mention that I meant to. We talked about CW keying with K1 EL WinKey solutions that are available on the internet. And other thing I didn't mention and I meant to was audio. So if you're not using remote rig, and you're not using a soft panel solution like the ICOM or Yaesu perhaps that transfers the audio as well, and actually Kenwood do a remote soft panel thing as well, don't they? There is an audio solution by DF Delta Fox 3 Charlie Bravo, which will allow low latency transfer of audio from a couple of there's a couple of Windows. Well, it's a Windows program that is a client can be used as client or server. So you could run it as server at the remote site and use it as client on a Windows laptop. And that's a good way of transferring audio, the Delta Fox 3 Charlie Bravo program.
Yeah, no, it's good. Well, as I said before to everybody at home now watching, if you've got questions or comments or anything for John, if you've experienced something similar yourself, do share them. We've got a couple of comments already coming in. First, I must give a shout out. We don't always do this, but it's not often we have people, I think, watching us from Brazil. So hello to Hamilton, PU4HPC. Thanks for saying 7-3. Very nice.
Obrigado.
I couldn't have done that. So, one of the things I wanted to ask, and I will get to your questions at home, but just one question I thought. You go to the site, it's only 5 miles, but you get there, you do an adjustment, maybe to change, trying to fix something. How do you test that that's working? Do you set up a remote station and bring it with you, a laptop or whatever, to see the effect of what you've done?
Yeah, so what I usually, I touched on, I've got 2 VPN solutions. One, the one that's embedded in the Draytech routers is the LAN-to-LAN VPN, and I have to be at home to be at the other end of that. The other one I'm using is some free software, actually. It's a cloud VPN called Zero Tier. And there's another one called Tailscale, which is quite similar, but Zero Tier lends its, and Soft Ether is another one as well that's widely used. But Zero Tier works for me. And what I usually do is take my phone or my laptop. I've got either of them. I've got Zero Tier installed, and they're connected to my virtual LAN that I have set up at the remote station, and so I can stand in the field with my mobile phone on the 4G network, and for instance switch the antenna relays or switch the main switch on and off. So I can test it from my phone when I'm in the field over that external network.
Yeah, but I'm sure you must need to. It would be very frustrating to keep going back home. So I've got some questions. Let's come on to viewers' questions now. First is from Richard G4IRN. He says he loved my K3's remote for EME and MS together with remote desktop, but missed the lack of waterfall. So he was going to ask you, have you tried anything to get some form of waterfall back from the K3? He's tried a webcam, but it's just not the same, he says.
Yeah, I'd love a waterfall, and I did flirt with the Flex 6500 for a short time, but it wasn't totally workable for other reasons. But I would love a waterfall. The only thing that, the thing that I'm starting to or have looked at is the SDR Play. Is it the
little receiver? There's a little receiver, an SDR receiver, yeah.
Yeah, the SDR Play, I think it's called. And there is a server program available for that runs on a Raspberry Pi, so you would plug the SDR Play into the IF output on the K3, or you could do it teed off the RX antenna out, I guess, into the SDR Play, and then the server software will run on a Raspberry Pi, and then you can connect to that with HDSDR as a client. Now, I haven't done it, but that is a potential solution. I did look at it about a year ago and felt that I would probably have the challenge of the bandwidth, the amount of data. I want to look at it again because it would be great to have a pan adapter, and I think that SDR Play route might be the best way to do it.
Yeah, and I guess that should use less data than, say, a video picture from a webcam or something, because you'd have latency with that in itself, and that video picture, at least in my world, takes quite a lot of bandwidth usually. Yeah,
exactly. And if you want to trade off bandwidth with quality, then as soon as you've got that trade-off, then it's not as good as it could be. So, okay. more work to be done there, I think.
All right, thank you.
On my part.
Andy M0NKR says, great talk, John, and I know it certainly works, ! He says, any plans for UPSs on any equipment? And also suggests, why not mount the hardware in 19-inch racks that are IP rated for waterproofing and have fans?
Cost. Yeah, that's why not. Cost.
Okay. Well, you have. I think most of us watching would say. I mean, most of us collect radios and we buy quite a lot of things, but this has clearly added quite an overhead, hasn't it?
Yeah.
I better let you answer that. Any plans for UPSs? Or does that apply to both those questions?
Well, I suppose it is really, and need. I mean, for a start, in terms of cost, actually, most of the radio kit I had already. There was some of the network stuff that I've had to buy additionally, but the sort of core radio stuff I had that already. The field, everyone wants to know how much I have to pay for it. My answer is it's very similar. In fact, it's less than my cousin pays for his horse. He and his partner have horses, and it's less than equestrian rates, I'm told, and certainly less than the cost of a golf club membership. Right. If you're looking at the cost of the renting the field.
And do they let you have the electricity, or is that sort of seen as a bit insignificant? Or
I've had to take out an account for that. So obviously there's a standing charge for that, plus use. So I do pay for the electricity. I have to pay for the 4G. There's an annual rental on the field, which as I say, it's not too much really, and it's cheaper than most equestrian users, I think. Then the cost of building the station, obviously the plastic shed from Argos, a couple of £100, I think. But most of the radio stuff I had, and then there's just the network stuff. Why haven't I done UPS? No need really. I mean,
you haven't often lost power then to need that?
A couple of times in 2 years. The racks, yeah, great idea. But it comes down to the amount of effort I want to put in, and just cost and payback.
And
really.
how often you'd have a failure. Just for everybody at home, by the way, we
Yeah.
try not to use too many abbreviations. There's a lot of beginners in this hobby, and that's
Sorry.
an uninterruptible power supply, UPS.
Yeah.
That's what that means. So something that essentially keeps the mains going, when, if you have a mains failure.
But I know where. Hi, Andy, by the way, and I know where he works, so maybe he can get some free for me from work.
I'll put you two in touch with each other. All right. Now, I've got some more questions. Stuart G4AFF. John, have you ever
Hi,
used...
Stuart.
Yeah, you know Stuart good?
Yeah,
he's just down the road from here, about 3 miles down the road.
Yes.
John, have you ever used Mumble for your audio?
No, but I've heard of it. Perhaps it's something I should look at.
Well, yeah,
Mumble.
I mean, Mumble, I guess is that an app? Do you know what Mumble does? Because I don't. I've never heard of that. I'd heard of Audacity that you mentioned earlier, but not Mumble.
I've heard of it. I'd have to look into it.
Okay. All right, maybe for encoding audio or something like that.
Possibly.
More efficiently. Jim, G3YLA, says superb...
Hi, Jim.
Superb...
Another one I know.
Yeah, well, they're all within about 20 miles of here. Jim, G3YLA, says, superb installation, John. How do you fare with lightning protection?
I live 5 miles away.
Right.
So I'm safe.
But in terms of, maybe
yeah.
unplugging the gear, I guess he's talking about.
I know. I'm being a little bit facetious. I just hope for the best.
Really? As simple as that?
Yeah.
But if you do see it or hear about a storm coming quite bad, I must admit, I do unplug the antennas from my radios. Do you not do that? You don't rush up to the site and do that if you're around?
No.
Just take a chance. Okay.
Yeah. Maybe. Knowing, in fact, knowing Jim's interests, maybe I should think of these weather events and provide more protection. And maybe, Jim, we can have a chat when we meet at the RSGB convention or something. But I don't know how, in a practical way, I could protect the station apart from disconnect the antennas.
No, but I've never heard of one, I must admit. And it's debatable whether you should earth or not earth and certain things, isn't it? Okay, well, I hope that helps anyway. And Jim can certainly give us an insight into the weather, can't he? Well, number 6, I don't know why, but it's signed in as number 6, so I don't know who that is, I'm afraid. But has asked a question, have you ever considered OpenWebRX for the waterfall?
No, but thanks. I've made a note of it. Thank you. OpenWebRX.
Yeah, you clearly, as well, you mentioned earlier on what you did in IT. This is, would I say, could frighten a lot of people who are not into the sort of software world, because there's quite a lot you've had to install. The hardware wouldn't frighten too many people, but the actual making everything work, and also on a PC, there's quite a lot of knowledge. Do you think you've got an above average knowledge which has enabled you to do this? For a workstation?
Well, my degree was in computer science.
Yeah.
So I guess that helped. But although I worked in IT, I worked in IT management consulting, which was more about organizational setups and processes and use of tools and so on, rather than techie nuts and bolts stuff. But I suppose, I do have a technical mind and some technical knowledge, Linux and networking and so on. And as I say, my degree was in computer science, so I guess I do have a head start.
But would it be fair to say, you said this has evolved anyway over 2 years, if you're a relative beginner, some of the plug and play options, maybe you could start in a modest way, particularly if you're trying to operate your home station while you're away?
Oh, absolutely. Mine is an extreme case, I think, and I don't suppose there's many other stations in the UK. Well, I know of one other guy, MM0ZBH, actually, whose call sign is on the screen there. He gave me a lot of help when I was setting up, and he is a network engineer, actually. But if you're just using, the main challenges in this setup are because of where it is and the fact that it's on a 4G network. So if you want to remote into your radio, with the radio at home, then it is going to be loads easier. And if you've got a modern radio that provides a remote solution, soft panel, for instance, like the ICOM or Kenwood do and the Yaesu do, then it's more or less plug and play. And
So
it'd be very straightforward.
Yeah, they're a good way to start, I guess, as well. I think the final question would possibly... Oh, by the way, Andy has added a thing here saying a 1-ton concrete blocks for guying solution, he suggests.
Yeah, I mean, that's something else. I've thought of that, and I've thought of, these big water containers that you can fill with water. But at the end of the day, at some point, I'm going to have to leave this site how I found it, and big concrete blocks don't sound like an easy thing to lump around.
No. One thing, actually, is a very good point. Roger G3LEI has asked, have you ever suffered from vandal damage?
Yeah, hi, Roger. No, I'm really off the beaten track. There is a footpath nearby, and I have seen people on it, but they're usually middle-aged people with a rucksack on their back. And, I've seen people walk the footpath and not even notice or look up at the antennas. So,
and I guess we're all used to seeing antennas about anyway, in remote, high up places and things. So maybe they don't stand out as much as we feel they might.
Yeah, I think that's the case. I think I'm more sensitive to it than other people are. But no, well, I've got security there. So
in what way, apart from the lovely front door that you put there, which I think was lovely?
Camera.
Okay.
And also light detection. If there's any light in the room. Also, the main road into the site, I've got friendly with the people who live on that track, so they generally see anyone going up. Plus, there's another house not far away that keep an eye out. So, touch wood, it's been okay, but it is remote and way off the beaten track. You can't drive there. I mean, my car, you can see just parts on the far side of that field, but I have to go through 2 locked gates to get there. So you wouldn't be able to drive a vehicle there unless you were to cut the locks. Yeah.
Do you have to? I suppose I should know this, but I mean the actual operating your station address as on your license, because the transmitting is all going from there. Does that the address that has to be on there, or is it? Yep. Can it be your home address that's actually the station address?
No, on my license I've put the address that the utility company used for the supply.
Right. Fantastic. We're nearly running out of time, and we've got another couple of points I'd like to say. Jim, by the way, G3LA is looking forward to seeing you for a chat at Milton Keynes. Of course, the convention, the RSGB's just recently announced that the convention's going ahead, and you can book that now, by the way. Martin M0XKM says, a very nice setup and a lovely comprehensive talk, thank you. For antenna disconnect for lightning, he suggested a Vimeo link, which I can send to you tomorrow. He's put it on. He's watching this on Facebook, and he says that uses a sliding tray with push antenna connectors. So there's a nice Vimeo video there that he's linked to you, and I'll send you that.
Okay, thank you.
Andy M0NKR says I remote my 7610 and access my station via remote desktop or the ICOM software. And I think there's a lot of their newer rigs you can do that, and I think with the 7300 and things as well, I believe as well. So we're really there. Just one other question I want to ask you, because I at least enjoy seeing a few of my radios all around the shack. Do you miss seeing the radios? I know you've got the virtual one with your K3 panel, which I suppose makes you feel a little bit at home, but most of your equipment is all very remote, so you've just got PC screens. Do you miss that side of it from your hobby?
Interesting one, really. Just in sort of domestic terms, my room is no longer called the shack; it's called the office, and I think that's probably because it's more like an office now than my old shack that was full of junk.
Yeah, I noticed that you did call your station in the shed. You called that the shack, didn't you?
Yes. Yeah. Do I? I don't know. My mindset is such that I'm just doing it differently. I'm doing the same stuff, but differently, and it's in a different place. So, I mean, actually, I do have a 2 meter radio here and an aerial in the loft that I just keep in touch with locals on, which is in the office here. Everything now that I had in my old place is now accessible through the screens rather than physically, and I suppose that is one of the downsides that I talked about, in that you haven't, it's not so tactile. You can't touch it and feel it, and see it if a cable's dropped out of the back. So I suppose in some ways that's how it's different. Whether I miss it or not, I don't know. My mindset's had to change.
Could it be that as you're a professional IT man as well, you do feel much more comfortable seeing things like IT, screens and things around you, with things happening remotely? You said your work's mainly remote now as well, so I guess maybe that helps.
I think it probably does. I'm just used to it. Yeah.
Anyway, it's been lovely to meet you, John. Thanks for a wonderful talk. This is really of interest to everybody, not even if you haven't got plans to hire a field 5 miles from you and do this, but all the other things that you've taught us as well to think about. I thought it was particularly interesting, actually, about the thing what you said about mobile providers, where it's not always signal strength you've got to look at. It doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get a good signal in terms of response times and latency. So that's worth taking home as well.
Absolutely. Well, I've thoroughly enjoyed it. Many thanks.
Many thanks, John. Thanks very much to John G4IRN. Right. Thank you.
Good night.
Thanks. That's almost it now. Just to remind you again what's happening at the club this Saturday, the Koblenz Sked at 7.123 megahertz at 10 a.m. with a local talking on 145250. On Sunday, the GB Tourist News on GB3MB. Monday sees the Monday Night Net at 7:30, also on GB3MB, and at 8 o'clock we've got the 80 metre CW net on 3.543 megahertz. And then next Wednesday, weeks from tonight, we're at the meeting at CNS for a social on the Raspberry Pi Jam. Don't forget the homework. And then the week after that, we'll also be at CNS for the discussion on the Ofcom consultation. And we'll see you again in 3 weeks' time here. But until then, from Tammy M0TC.
Bye-bye.
And from me, David G7URP. Take care of yourselves. Look after. Bye-bye.